right, Bryan, so that's a pretty close look at those five. And where do we go from here? We're going to start covering the explanation, trying to figure out a theory or an explanation that kind of encapsulates all of this. And where do we take that?
Yeah, so there's a finite number of explanations that have been offered by scholars, throughout the ages. And so I think we can look at most of these that have been put forward and kind of evaluate them, talk about what they are, and then see how they match up with these five facts that we have. So the first would be a legend theory. And this can take a couple of different forms. First is if we want to just go all in and say the whole thing is legend. This is kind of what's known as Jesus mythicism. That Jesus didn't actually even exist as a real person. All of this is just legend fabricated much later after the supposed events. And this is actually surprisingly kind of popular, like online, people that aren't working in the field, that just assume like this, Jesus probably never even existed. This is all just stupid.
Any self-proclaimed expert.
Right.
I believe that Jesus never. This is false.
Yeah. And so this is rejected by, pretty much every scholar who specializes in the field. Like Jesus obviously was a historical person. There's a lot that we can know about him, even if we don't want to think all of this is true. And we saw that his resurrection or his crucifixion is very well historically attested to. And so this just doesn't hold any water at all.
So as we begin to look at these opposing theories, like, hey, we're going to try to figure out how to explain those facts, but in doing so without a supernaturally resurrected Jesus. Number one, let's just claim there was no Jesus.
Right.
Hard, very hard, actually impossible to defend this in any real sort of way.
Yeah, it's just really not taken seriously anymore in scholarly circles, But maybe there was a historical Jesus, this figure that was just a regular guy, and the stories were embellished over time. Of his miracles, of even his claims to be God and chosen by God, and his resurrection. This developed much later, and it's just fanciful
snowballed.
Legend. I mean, we all know how legend can develop. The problem with this is that our sources take us back to almost immediately after the event, get us really close with no indication of legendary development at all, right? Or embellishment. Not enough time passed, for one, for this to take place, and no evidence exists that it did take place. So from the earliest documents that we have, which get very close to the source, we see all the essential elements of Christian doctrine present in even these earliest sources. You don't see like a very basic kind of historical Jesus figure, and then much later
500 years later he's
much
God,
more of a divine, and that's attempted to be argued at times, but I think objectively looking at the evidence available, that's just not the case.
There's overwhelming evidence so close to the immediacy of what happened. They're congruent with much later documents that assert the same things. Even if it had been fanciful legend beginning immediately after, there were enough eyewitnesses that would have rejected that, rebutted that. We would have had competing documents saying Jesus was this, no, Jesus was this. And we just don't see that.
Right. You have this uniform kind of witness very early on. And so assessing this to the facts that we've established, this misses on all five facts. So we're not doing very good off the right out of the gate.
We can throw that
this
one out
is
pretty quickly.
Our worst theory. Even though it's very popular,
unfortunately.
It's about the worst one out there. So second, there's the fraud theory that the disciples stole the body. This is literally the oldest one in the book, right? We saw this in the book in Matthew. Or maybe someone else stole the body. My friend Louis requested that I title this the Tomb Raider theory.
Not grave robbers.
No, not grave robbers. The Tomb Raiders theory. But remember, we have strong evidence that the disciples actually believed that Jesus rose and appeared to them. They weren't lying. And so that kind of rules out the disciples stealing the body and intentionally lying about it, right? But also a missing body, if someone else stole it, a missing body would not be enough on its own to convince someone that he had risen from the dead. They would just think someone stole the body. Right. And it would have kind of died there. And even if you did want to say, well, they had some expectation of this and this just confirmed this previous expectation, well, that can't explain the conversion of skeptics who didn't have that expectation.
Yeah. And it seems like the body would have been the most damning evidence that the enemies of Jesus, the quasi-religious political groups of Pharisees, the Sadducees, the priests, they would have wanted to find and produce this body to just squelch this whole Jesus thing immediately.
Right. And that's all it would have taken to do it.
Yeah.
And they definitely wanted to do that.
Yeah. It seems like if there were a body floating around somewhere, they would have gone to every length imaginable to find and produce that body.
Yeah. And that's especially relevant to our next theory, which is the wrong tomb theory. And I kind of think of this as like, it's a busy day at Walmart. You come out of the store and you're going down and you are looking for your car, and it's, this is where you expected it to be, and it's just not there.
Yeah.
And your first thought is, oh my gosh, somebody stole my car, right? And then you realize you're just like the wrong aisle over. You're in D and you were supposed to be in E.
Yeah.
The problem is I don't know that the first century Jewish graveyards were set up with multiple
aisle and row.
Aisles that all looked just alike. So
right.
But this is basically that the women, they were distraught, they were upset, they were probably crying and didn't see clearly or whatever. And they just went to the wrong tomb, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's empty.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, merely finding an empty tomb, again, would not give rise to the belief that Jesus rose from the dead. You have to have some appearances with that as well, something like that. In this case, the body would be available in the right tomb.
Immediately.
Right? Yeah. And so as soon as this story started spreading, the Jewish leaders wouldn't have had to find the tomb raiders. They could have just gone to the correct
dummies,
tomb.
it's this one.
Yeah, it's right here. The body's here. You're just wrong.
Right.
Stop spreading this nonsense, and they could have squelched it right there.
Yeah, and there are plenty of people who wanted to, again, who we know would have.
Right. And so this, just like with the fraud theory, misses on facts 2, 3, and 4, the appearances and the conversion of the skeptics. And it kind of explains the empty tomb in a sense that there's a empty tomb, but not the empty tomb. So that could have been cleared up if the body was really there.
This next one might be my personal favorite.
Yeah, this is a good one. So the next one is the twin theory. Jesus had a long lost identical twin brother, probably separated at birth, raised in a different part of Israel or whatever, And,
I can see someone selling movie rights to this.
Oh, yeah.
It's good.
He just happened to come into Jerusalem right after the crucifixion.
Dumb luck.
Yeah, what are the chances? And was mistaken for the risen Lord because he looks so much like him.
Yeah.
I mean, I've known identical twins that I could not tell them apart, You just never call them by name.
Yeah.
Right?
Hey, guy.
Hey, good to see you again.
Hey, pal.
And you too, whichever ones you are. This it probably will sound to some people like we're just making these up, right? That this is.
It sounds like it.
But this is actually a theory that was put forward by the scholar Robert Gregg Cavan. In the early to mid 90s.
In our lifetimes.
Not very long ago. But after having this view demolished in a debate with Christian philosopher William Lane Craig, I understand that he no longer holds this view and in fact refuses to discuss it. And that's kind of the terms for him accepting any invitation to debate or discuss that this won't be brought up. So it's kind of a fun one, right? But it would obviously involve also some sort of conspiracy to make this
most
happen.
of these do, yeah. But this ends up just feeling like someone's been watching too many soap operas and came up with this really neat idea. Like, oh, hey, what if they're twins, separated, but nobody knew? But then this dude, just by dumb luck, appears on the very day that he would need to.
Yeah.
But then he's a quick thinking opportunist. And so he's like, oh, yes, I am Jesus.
Right.
and yet
Instead of just clearing it up, I'm not Jesus.
Right. Yeah. But all of the disciples and even the family members, Mary, the mother of Jesus, is quite involved with all of this. James, the half brother of Jesus, who at this time didn't even believe, would have called foul on this one pretty quickly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe the disciples, I mean, if you looked enough like him, had the same kind of facial tics or whatever it was, they're like, didn't you have a mole on your left cheek?
Yeah.
Or
don't you remember the storm? You were there.
Right. Eventually that's going to fall apart.
Yeah.
But, so maybe we can give it to the disciples at first, give them number 2, but it definitely misses on 4 and 5.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be able to fool Jesus's brother James with this, who was a skeptic, remember, to begin with.
Yep.
And then it doesn't explain the empty tomb. I mean, there's still a body there, right? Eventually somebody's going to figure out, wait a minute, you say you're Jesus, but there's a body here. Yeah. So that doesn't work out too well. Next, we have the swoon theory.
Okay.
And this is basically that Jesus didn't actually die. He just maybe passed out from the pain of the crucifixion.
So he was crucified,
right,
but not unto death.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Just kind of passed out. The soldiers looking at him thought he was dead, and so they took him down from the cross, placed him in a tomb where the cool air and the spices eventually revived him.
Wow.
And then he, came
I'm not
to,
dead yet.
stood up, okay. Showed himself to his disciples, and they worshipped him as the risen Lord who conquered death.
Yeah. That seems like grasping at straws still. Like, okay, so maybe Jesus did exist. Clearly he was crucified, but maybe he didn't really die, and then somehow he just he's a robust human being, and he recovered quickly and was able to come out and say, hey guys, resurrected, look at me, type of deal.
Right.
It's feeling hard to...
Well, the interesting about this theory is it's our best one so far as explaining the facts. It only misses on number 1.
Okay.
That Jesus died by crucifixion.
Yeah.
So you might think maybe this is a strong one so far. But I think when you start to get into the details and see the overall plausibility of this, it really starts to break down. There was an article written in 1986 in the March 21st issue of the Journal of the American Medical Association, written by doctors, just taking a look at the crucifixion of Jesus, the scourging and crucifixion of Jesus from a medical perspective. And so it wasn't making any claim as to the historicity of the event, right? Just if it happened.
It's a mental exercise.
Right. Medically, what would we be looking at? The physical effects of the crucifixion.
If swooned, passed out because of the pain, Jesus, which seems plausible, came to the ER, what are we looking at medically speaking? Maybe is the idea they're approaching this from.
Yeah, definitely. And, and you need to start looking at what crucifixion was. You're nailed with nails through your wrist that would either crush or completely sever that median nerve, which is basically your funny bone nerve.
Yikes.
And both hands, they would drive a nail through the feet, which would be usually folded on top of each other.
Tacked
one
together.
nail through both of them. There's one skeletal remains of a crucifixion victim that was found with a nail still in the feet because they couldn't pull the nail out. It was driven in there so strong, wedged between those bones. And just the effects of the beating and then the crucifixion, which is not a death by loss of blood or pain or anything like that. It's a death of asphyxiation. Right. So you're, in order to take a breath, you have to stand up on that nail on your feet and scrape your back against this rough wooden cross to be able to, get your lungs to be able to inhale, right? And then you drop down and exhale, and so you have to keep doing that in order to take breaths. And
as your strength is ebbing, you're kind of suffocating yourself by the way your body is dangling.
So the results of this article, their findings, is that the trauma that the body would experience from this is so severe that really, even if this happened today on the doorstep of our most advanced, ER facility, there would be little to no hope of saving a person
just
having gone through
the mass trauma.
Yeah, and to think that it could be placed in a cold, damp tomb with no food or water for a couple of days and zero care, zero attention, and then somehow revive enough to to be mistaken for someone who's conquered death and rose from the dead,
Right.
is pretty far fetched. And in fact,
Absolutely.
if that we just grant that maybe he would survive, they would look at him and think, "Oh my gosh, you're still alive. We need to get you medical help right now." You know, it would be a very different scenario, I think.
Absolutely.
So then we have the psychological phenomena theories. First, the hallucination theory.
Okay.
This is probably the most prominent theory still
Okay.
live today and defended today. That the appearances of Jesus can be attributed to hallucinations. These are just mental phenomena going on here. So I think the best candidate for this are what are known as grief hallucinations.
Right. Yeah.
So you have someone who's grieving, and this is common with maybe older people who lose their spouse of many years. You know, that they have what they think that their loved one after dying appears to them, and maybe says something, maybe not.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. You lose someone. You're walking in the grocery store and you swear that that's them, till you take a second look and realize not at all. But your mind is missing, grieving so much that it kind of tricks you, deceives you into thinking, well, maybe that person is them. They look close enough.
Yeah, it could be. I think they're generally more like when the person is alone, maybe at night in bed, like kind of right on the verge. Right. Like right on the verge of falling asleep, in between sleep and wakefulness, kind of this area where the mind is, kind of more at work in this way.
Okay.
And you might, so you could attribute this to grief. The disciples wanted so bad for this to be real, for Jesus to have been the one that they hallucinated. They have these sort of grief hallucinations.
Yeah.
The problem was, one of the problems, there's many problems, but that Paul and James were skeptics prior to experiencing these appearances.
There was no longing in the heart for those two men.
Right. And so you can't attribute that to grief hallucinations. Hallucinations are a symptom of mental illness, right? There's this isn't something that a healthy mind concocts, right? They are symptoms of a deeper problem, and usually a much deeper problem, like a severe mental illness, where these people are not like functioning well.
Yeah, this isn't just a one-time mental.
A generally
crash.
Healthy,
this
high functioning
need to be a long-term, very mentally unwell person.
Right, and here these are supposedly things that are happening to these men who were able to organize and carry out a movement that would spread across the entire world. That doesn't look like mentally ill.
They're
people.
logical, they're intelligent, they're well-functioning.
Right.
And oh, by the way, we keep on using group language. There's more than just one person simultaneously having this alleged hallucination.
Right, and that's another problem, that hallucinations are not group appearances.
Right.
And, Paul mentions in at the end of that creed there that Jesus appeared to 500 people at once. Whether or not that was an addition onto the creed or part of the creed, we're not sure, but he says there that many of these people are still alive, and you can go check for yourself. Right. But even if we don't accept, maybe a critical scholar would not accept that actually happened. Right. I mean, you're still saying that there are multiple disciples, maybe not at once, but had this vision. And you have two mentally ill, kind of crazy people, sitting next to each other hallucinating. Like, man, did you see that? Like, well, if you saw something, it probably wasn't whatever I saw, right? Because a hallucination is something in your own mind. It's not an objective sort of reality, right? And so that can't be shared by someone else. So that's definitely problematic. But maybe we should, instead of looking at it as a hallucination, maybe more of a vision. Okay, so there's a vision, a theory. If it's an objective vision, something that's a real vision out, not in the mind, right, of the beholder, but maybe a real vision of Jesus in heaven. Well, then that would be kind of an odd explanation, because that's a supernatural event, right?
I'm rebutting your supernatural assertion with another supernatural.
Yeah.
Source. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
There's some problems there.
Right. And I think the main problem with that, and this goes kind of back to our background data, the Jewish, at the time, the Jewish conception of resurrection.
Yeah.
If this sort of thing happened as an objective vision, they wouldn't call it a resurrection.
Right.
They would call it a vision.
Yeah. They had specific language that differentiates those. It's not interchangeable by any means.
And if they saw a vision of an exalted Jesus in heaven, they wouldn't say that he rose from the dead. They would say that he is exalted.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Something like that. And I think we even see an example of an objective vision in the book of Acts with Stephen.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So that's something that recorded there. Even if you don't want to grant that it happened, it's still something recorded in the same context of claiming resurrection appearances.
Yeah.
So Stephen has this vision of the exalted Jesus standing at the right hand of the Father, that sort of thing, right? Yeah. And it was called a vision, and it wasn't listed in the list of appearances. It wasn't attributed as an appearance of Jesus.
Yeah.
So that's something he had, this objective vision that wasn't considered an appearance of the risen Jesus. So that when we talk about the appearances, we're talking about a different category.
Very different. Yeah. Okay.
So these appearances also, if we look at the gospel accounts, and and this would require some defense of the reliability of the gospel accounts, which I think can be given. These appearances were prolonged interactions that involved multiple sensory experiences. They were able to have conversations with Jesus, long conversations. They were able to touch him. They ate meals with him, right? That sort of thing. And like I said, you'd have to, in order to argue this point, go beyond these 5 facts and argue for the general reliability of these accounts. But I think that can be done.
It draws to mind the classical doubting Thomas. Maybe you guys just saw a vision. I, on the other hand, will not believe until I see a bodily resurrected Jesus and I physically place my hands, my fingers into these wounds, so I know there's this bodily resurrection. I mean, he differentiates kind of this idea that the Jews, they did believe in visions. It was as a major part of the prophets and their faith. But this resurrection thing was something totally different. Right.
Yeah. A whole different category. And good point. That's exactly what Thomas was saying, right? You're claiming a resurrection, and I expect that there is a body here that I can touch and physically feel. Yeah. So these theories, if we want to assess them according to the facts, the whole point of advancing these theories is they can account for the appearances, right? And so we've seen problems with that, but if we want to give them the appearances might have been hallucinations. So we'll give them the death of Jesus, we'll give them the appearances, but it doesn't explain the conversion of skeptics who didn't have any kind of expectation of this. And there would still be a body, right? So you still have the empty tomb that it misses on. So the last one that we're going to look at is known as the Passover plot.
Okay.
And this is where Jesus and others, specifically the Joseph of Arimathea and a mysterious young man, I don't know why these two, this is how the story goes, right? Another one of these good ones. They conspire to fulfill the messianic prophecies in the Old Testament. And so, you might think Jesus, he's growing up and, reading his scriptures and seeing, these prophecies of the Messiah and thinking, well, I was born in Bethlehem, right? I've already got that going for me. The one that was out of my control. Maybe I could get the rest of these and I could be king of Israel, accepted as king of Israel.
Self-fulfilling these prophecies.
But then he gets to these awkward passages about a suffering Messiah, and I'm like, well, how do you pull that off? And so he gets together with these 2 other guys and here's how we're going to do it. You can say these things and it'll make the Jewish leaders really mad and they'll want to crucify you. But we'll have a deal. It'll be right there, and we'll take your body, take you down before you're dead. And then you can be like the risen,
very conspiratorial,
Lord, right? Yeah, this is a full blown conspiracy theory, right? And so everything was going great. They got the Jewish leaders mad at him. He was crucified. Everything was going according to plan. But they forgot to include the Roman soldier in the plan, and he went and screwed everything up by stabbing a spear in Jesus' side, killed him.
Man.
Like, now what?
Yeah.
So you have Joseph and this mysterious young man. They're like, is there any way to salvage this? What do we do? We've just wasted years of our life, right?
Yeah.
But apparently this mysterious young man looked enough like Jesus. They could do his hair a little differently or whatever, and pass him off as the risen Lord. And so that's what they did, right? So how does that line up with the facts? You know, this, if we think about the twin theory, right? Jesus' identical twin brother.
Getting pretty close
Maybe
to
an
that.
identical twin could fool the disciples who weren't family, you know.
Right.
But if you just spent the last 3 years with a guy, you'd know if it was a completely different person, right?
Yeah.
So I'd say it misses on number 2. Maybe you could fool Paul, Saul of Tarsus, because, you know, we don't know that he knew Jesus personally before that.
Yeah.
Definitely not James.
Seriously.
So it misses on that one, and then you'd still have a body on your hands, you know, unless they stole it, hid it somehow, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it seems like that one gets pretty close to the forgotten twin. It kind of gets close to the swoon theory, which, oh, by the way, we didn't even mention the whole spear in his side thing.
Right.
What if there's some other concoction? Can we mix and match some of these opposing theories and come up with something else? I mean, have people tried that also?
Yeah. So right. Maybe we can take one that explains a few facts and another that explains some other facts and get a stronger theory by combining them. I think the problem with that is that each aspect, each part of that combination, there should be able to be shown to be plausible, and there's evidence for it. I think maybe the best scenario you can come up with would be mixing like a hallucination theory with a theft of the body, something like that. But then all the inherent problems of the hallucination theory still apply. Right. So you just can't get rid of those, right?
Yeah.
And I think that ends up being more ad hoc, more contrived to fit the data than just the ones by themselves, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So that's pretty much the alternative theories that have been put out there. So the problems with these, as I see it, is that they don't explain all the facts.
Yeah.
Right. There should be good reasons for thinking these are true independently, right? And I don't think you see that, especially with some of these, like the twin theory, the Passover plot, the swoon theory, all of these.
Yeah.
And many of these are almost as hard to believe as a supernatural explanation.
Yeah.
You know, when you actually like get into the details of those.
Absolutely.
So, maybe they're easier to accept than a supernatural, just because they don't appeal to miracles, something like that. Yeah. But they're pretty unbelievable and seem really contrived just to fit the data. You know, not really any better than you or I just sitting around and like, well, maybe we can make up a story that can fit all of this. But that doesn't mean there's evidence for it that actually happened, right?
Yeah, and it feels like at some level you've gone so far to make these pretty drastic, improbable claims of like, okay, so what if this and that and this were true? It seems like you've gone so far to the edge of improbability. Why would you not be willing to take an honest look at the supernatural resurrection if it's as arguably improbable as your own theory? Why not give this an honest look?
Right. And I think that, looking at the bodily resurrection of Jesus, that God raised Jesus from the dead, this does explain all the facts. And it's not ad hoc. It's not contrived, invented just to fit the data. Yeah. This is actually the original story that's pulled from the documents themselves, right? This is the original claim. So it's not something we've made up later that can explain all these facts. We're taking the original story, something drawn from the original documents, and saying, like, is there historical evidence for it? Yeah. What are the facts we can determine, and does it explain those facts? It actually does. It explains all of those facts.
Right.
Maybe it has kind of a low prior probability, and we need more evidence. But once you account for, like, well, there's good reasons to think that God exists, right? And just the overall context of the Jewish culture at the time and beliefs, and and the person and claims of Jesus, I think raises that probability. And then we, on top of that, we have a really good amount of evidence that supports this explanation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So finally, I think that really the only reason for rejecting this is if you're already biased against it, just thinking that there's no God or that miracles are impossible. But, like we said at the beginning, I think if you're willing to maybe suspend judgment on that and just look at the evidence to see where it leads, that it does point in that direction. And then hopefully, we haven't argued for the existence of God here, but I think that can be done. There's really good reasons to think that that's that God does exist.
Absolutely.
So this doesn't prove conclusively that Jesus rose from the dead. You don't get conclusive mathematical type proof from any historical investigation, right? But I do think that it shows that the resurrection is the best explanation of the facts, and that it's reasonable to believe that Jesus rose from the dead, and also that, as it turns out, we're in a surprisingly good position over 2,000 years later to assess this situation and to determine what actually happened.
Absolutely.
I remember this case only utilizes those lowest common denominators of facts, right? Yeah. If in a manner of speaking, this is the weakest case we can make for the resurrection. Okay. And as you argue for the reliability of the gospel accounts and take more of that evidence into consideration, the case just gets stronger and stronger.
Absolutely.
So I think even taking that weakest case, just the minimal facts, it still ends up being the best explanation of the facts.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Bryan, so much for all the work you've put into this and presenting this.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Anthem, we hope that this encourages you. In some ways, I really admire and encourage doubting Thomas, because he was like, I just need a little bit more to believe this. I just need a bit more. And we hope that this sort of presentation for us, it has helped us in the kind of the history of our faiths. And we hope that it will do the same for you, Anthem, that our Christian faith is not flimsy, it's not foolish. We certainly don't want to be head in the sand believers who don't want to take too close of a look at our faith because we want it to be true and we don't want it to fall apart. We believe that our faith is robust, that there are many sources, there are very good arguments, there are very plausible explanations, even if they are supernatural explanations. And we hope that this not only challenges you, but that it can encourage you also during this Passion Week, that there is good reason that the crux of our faith is accounting all of the options. It is the best option to believe in, and that it will encourage us as we celebrate this resurrection of Christ this Easter, that we can hopefully do so with more of a robust faith, with more comprehensive knowledge of why it is that we believe in this, the most important assertion of Christianity, and that it will help you as you share your faith with others, that we can point people towards the facts, towards the arguments, to the existence of God, to the probability of the bodily resurrection of Christ. And if Christ did rise from the dead, he is worth looking at closely to believe his teachings and the truth that is contained in them. We will include for you more resources in the links below if you guys want to check those out. We hope that you will do so. Feel free to share those with people if it is helpful for you or for them. And again, thank you, Bryan. Thank you, Anthem, for tuning in, and we will catch you later. Bye. Bye.